My name is Martha Collins. I'm 66 years old, and on the night, everything changed. I was standing in the hallway outside my son's apartment with a chocolate cake trembling in my hands. The box was still warm against my fingers, the kind of warmth only a mother remembers from years of baking late at night, hoping her child will feel loved. I had driven 3 hours to Chicago because Evan told me, in that distracted voice adult children sometimes use, "Yeah, Mom, you can come." But it wasn't his voice that greeted me. The door opened, and there she was, Claire, my daughter-in-law. Flawless, as always, smelling of expensive perfume and impatience. Her eyes swept over me the way someone glances at old furniture left on the curb. "We only invited you out of pity," she said. "So don't stay long. Please don't make things uncomfortable." For a moment, I didn't feel my age. I felt hollow, like the part of me that had spent decades holding my family together simply slipped through my fingers and hit the floor. Evan stood behind her, a drink in his hand, pretending not to notice me. But he saw, and he chose to look away. So I lifted my chin, set the cake down on the small table near the elevator, and walked away without a word, only a quiet promise rising in my chest. This time, I wasn't going to disappear. When I pulled away from that apartment building, the city lights smeared across my windshield like streaks of gold bleeding into darkness. I remember gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, afraid that if I let go, the numbness crawling up my chest would swallow me whole. I drove without turning on the radio, without making a single sound, because silence was the only thing that didn't hurt. And as I crossed the bridge over the river, something inside me began to unravel, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet ache, like a seam that had been worn thin over years finally giving way. I wasn't always this woman who drove home alone from a son who barely looked at her. There was a time when Evan was the reason I woke up every morning. I built my life around him the way some people build around a dream, careful, fragile, hopeful. After my husband passed, it was just the two of us in a small rental house on the east side of Cleveland. The winters were brutal that year, and the furnace would rattle violently every night, threatening to give out. I used to sit on the edge of Evan's bed, wrapped in my old wool coat, and watch him sleep under 3 layers of blankets. His breath made tiny clouds in the cold air, and I would tuck the covers tighter around him and whisper, "It's going to be okay. I'm here." Back then, Evan would reach out in his sleep and grab my fingers like he was afraid I'd vanish. If I close my eyes now, I can still feel that tiny hand holding on to me with complete trust. It felt like purpose. It felt like home. Those early years were a blur of exhaustion and determination. I worked the morning shift at a grocery store, ringing up customers who seldom looked at me, then rushed across town to clean office floors after sunset. I'd come home with the smell of ammonia on my clothes, my knees stiff from scrubbing tile, but no matter how tired I was, I always found the strength to sit at the kitchen table with Evan and help him with his homework. He would draw rockets and robots on the margins of his worksheets, always dreaming of building something that could touch the sky. I held on to those dreams as if they were my own. There were nights when the power got shut off because I couldn't pay the bill on time. I'd light 2 candles and pretend it was an adventure, reading him stories with shadows dancing across the walls. Evan always believed me when I told him everything would get better. He believed because I said it. And to a child, a mother's voice is law. I remember the first time he brought home a certificate from school, Outstanding Achievement in Science. His smile could have lit the whole neighborhood. He ran straight into my arms and said, "Mom, one day I'm going to get you a big warm house so you never have to wear your coat inside again." I laughed. partly because the promise was so sweet, partly because I believed him. Children don't make promises lightly. They say things they mean. Years passed, and life settled into a rhythm that was far from easy, but still ours. When Evan got accepted into a reputable engineering program, I sat in my car outside the mailbox and cried until my scarf was soaked. Not because I was sad, but because the world finally felt a little less cruel. He was going somewhere I never could, somewhere I had worked half my life to push him toward. I drove him to campus in my old sedan, the one that shook violently above 50 miles per hour. He hugged me tight before walking into his dorm, and I can still hear his voice from that morning. "Mom, I'll make you proud. I'll make everything worth it." I believed every word. And for a while, he did make me proud. He graduated early, landed an engineering job in Chicago, and started talking about plans, how he wanted me to live nearby, how he wanted to take me to nice restaurants, how everything was going to change. For a brief moment, I let myself imagine it. Weekends together, dinners, holidays, maybe even a future daughter-in-law who would welcome me with warmth. I imagined belonging. But when I finally moved to a small apartment in Chicago, just to be closer, just to make visits easier, things didn't unfold the way I expected. At first, Evan came by every week, sometimes bringing takeout, sometimes asking for advice the way he always had. He still hugged me, still kissed my forehead, still said he missed me. Then he met Claire. The shift wasn't dramatic. It happened in tiny increments, the way grass grows between cracks before you notice it's overtaken the sidewalk. Evan stopped coming by as often. His calls became shorter. When we met for lunch, he would spend half the time checking his phone. He was distracted, but I told myself it was the excitement of a new relationship. Young people drift a little. That's normal, I thought. I didn't want to be the clingy mother. I didn't want to be a burden. But small things began to sting. The first time he introduced me to Claire, she shook my hand like she was afraid I might spill something on her blouse. She asked polite questions, but they were rehearsed. Distant, the kind you ask someone you intend to keep at arm's length. When Evan excused himself to take a call, I was left with a woman who looked at me like she was trying to figure out where I belonged in her life and wasn't finding a place. I pushed aside the unease and tried to see the good. I told myself she'd warm up. Some people needed time. Some daughters-in-law grew closer after the wedding. Some families took longer to blend, but every time I drove home after seeing them, I felt something new creeping into my chest, an unfamiliar heaviness, as if I were slowly losing the boy who once clung to my finger in the cold. And though I didn't understand it yet, that heaviness was the beginning of something much bigger, something I wouldn't be able to ignore for long. Claire didn't change Evan overnight. If anything, the change slipped into our lives so quietly that I didn't notice the shape of it until it was already settled between us. In the early months of their relationship, I tried to keep an open heart. Evan seemed excited, hopeful even. And as a mother, nothing mattered more to me than seeing him happy. But every time I met Claire, I felt something inside me tense, like a warning I couldn't name. She had a beauty that was sharp rather than soft, the kind that turned heads in expensive hotel lobbies. Her voice was smooth, trained, deliberate, and she always looked like she had stepped out of a curated magazine spread. Evan looked at her the way young men look at things they think will elevate them. And maybe that was the first sign that he didn't just love her, he admired what she represented. The first time I visited Evan's new place after they moved in together, Claire greeted me with a smile that felt stretched at the edges. She offered me sparkling water, but when I asked for regular water instead, she hesitated, as if I had disrupted some invisible balance in her perfectly arranged kitchen. I watched her fill a tall glass halfway, place it in front of me, and subtly wipe a non-existent spot off the counter. Everything about her movements said, "Don't touch too much." I told myself I was being sensitive, that I needed to adapt to the new rhythm of his adult life, but it was hard to ignore how quickly the casual closeness between Evan and me eroded. When he spoke to Claire, he sounded older, more polished. When he spoke to me, he sounded distracted, like he was trying to keep a door shut behind him. The first real crack came that Thanksgiving. I had baked a pecan pie, the recipe handed down from my mother, and called Evan early that morning to ask what time I should come. He hesitated before answering, and that brief silence was enough to make my stomach twist. Mom, we're doing Thanksgiving with Claire's family this year. They already planned everything. It's kind of last minute. But you didn't mention it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've already baked the pie. I'm sorry. It just slipped my mind. Slipped his mind. The words hit me harder than I expected. For years. Holidays had been the anchor of our little family, small meals, simple conversations, moments where we could both breathe. But now, with a single phone call, I was erased from the picture without even a discussion. That afternoon, I sat alone at my small dining table, the untouched pie beside me, feeling the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort. It isolates. I told myself they were newly in love, that young couples like to impress each other's families. Maybe next year would be different. Maybe they would remember me then. But the next year came, and nothing changed. Christmas passed with a generic gift card from Evan and a text sent at 10 p.m. "Merry Christmas. Mom, hope you're doing well." No visit, no phone call, no effort. Birthdays became afterthoughts. Weekends became excuses. Every time I tried to reach out, I felt like I was tapping on a window no one intended to open. Still, I kept trying. I invited them over for dinner more times than I can count. I cooked Evan's favorite dishes, pot roast, baked macaroni, those lemon bars he used to devour in minutes. Claire always declined with a polite but firm tone. "We're watching our calories. We already have plans. Maybe next month." Next month never came. One evening, after another one of Claire's clipped replies, Evan finally said, "Mom, you don't have to try so hard." It was meant to sound gentle, but it landed like a quiet blow. Try so hard, as if loving him had become a burden he didn't ask for. It wasn't always coldness, though sometimes Claire would make comments that felt harmless until I thought about them later. Lines like, "Evan's friends all say I have such modern taste. Your style is classic." Or, "You're so sweet to want to help, but Evan and I can handle things ourselves." Each sentence carved a little more space between us. The day she moved a framed photo of Evan and me from his college graduation, one of the happiest days of my life, from the living room shelf to a back hallway, was the day I felt something shift inside me. When I asked Evan why it had been moved, he shrugged. "Claire's reorganizing the apartment. She has an eye for aesthetics." "And I don't?" I asked, only half joking. He didn't answer. He didn't even look up from his phone. That was the moment I realized what I had become in their home. An ornament that didn't fit the theme. Something they tolerated but didn't cherish. Something to move aside when entertaining guests. I left their place early that day, walking slowly to my car, trying to steady my breath. I'd never felt so old, so out of place, so foreign in my own son's world. I started noticing everything after that. The way Evan paused before answering my calls, the way Claire's eyes tightened whenever I stepped into their apartment, the way conversations with my son grew shorter, less intimate, as though every word had to be filtered through Claire's preferences. I told myself I could live with distance. Children grow up. They carve their own paths. But what I couldn't live with was the feeling of being quietly pushed out of my own family, as if I were something they were trying to outgrow. And deep down, I sensed something darker forming beneath the surface of their kindness, the kind that smiles at you while taking away a little piece of your place in the world. I didn't know it yet, but the night of Evan's birthday, when Claire told me to not stay long, wasn't the start of the end. It was simply the moment I could no longer pretend I didn't see it. Evan's 32nd birthday fell on a chilly Saturday, the kind of day when the wind slipped under your coat and tugged at your bones. I woke early that morning, determined to make the chocolate cake he used to beg for every year. I sifted the cocoa powder slowly, letting the scent fill my small kitchen the way it used to fill our old house when he was a boy. Back then, he'd hover beside me, waiting for a chance to lick the spoon. Now, I stood alone, trying to remember the last time he asked for anything made by my hands. Still, when I boxed the cake and tied a ribbon around it, I felt a small spark of hope. He had called me that morning, short, rushed, but he called, "Yeah, Mom, you can come by around 7. Not warm, not eager. But an invitation is an invitation, and I clung to it the way someone clings to the last step of a crumbling staircase. I arrived a few minutes before 7, smoothing my sweater before knocking. Music pulsed faintly through the door, the kind of upbeat party playlist that had no place in the quiet evenings Evan and I used to share. When the door finally opened, Claire stood in the doorway wearing an emerald dress that shimmered under the hallway light. Her hair was pinned up in a style I'd only seen in magazines, perfect and unmoving. "Hi, Claire," I said, holding out the cake with both hands. She didn't reach for it. She didn't even look at it. Instead, she let her gaze travel from my shoes to my face, her expression tightening as if my presence had thrown off the symmetry of her evening. "Oh, you made it." For a moment, I thought she might step aside and welcome me in. I thought she might show the slightest courtesy a daughter-in-law should offer, but instead, she leaned an arm against the doorframe, blocking the entrance. "We only invited you out of pity," she said softly, though the softness made the words sting even more. "So please don't stay long. Evan has important people here tonight, and we just don't want anything awkward." The hallway seemed to shrink around me. I felt the warmth drain from my hands, leaving the cake box trembling. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. Behind her, I heard laughter, bright, relaxed, careless. A dozen voices, glasses clinking. Someone calling Evan's name. His celebration was in full swing, and yet I stood outside like an unwanted delivery. I forced myself to look past her shoulder. Evan was inside, leaning near the kitchen island with a group of co-workers and what looked like Claire's entire family. 20 people at least. The apartment glowed with warm lights, polished decor, trays of catered food. This wasn't last minute. This wasn't small. This was planned, curated, executed. Without a place for me. He saw me. I know he did. His eyes met mine for a brief, fragile moment. In that second, I searched for something, regret, surprise, even guilt, anything. But his gaze slid away as if I were a stranger lingering too long at a doorway I didn't belong to. I could have argued. I could have defended myself, reminded Claire that I raised him alone, that I worked until my hands cracked to give him the life he was so proud to show off tonight. But humiliation has a way of stealing your voice before you even realize it's gone. So I breathed in slowly, straightened my spine, and set the cake down on the small side table beside the elevator. "Tell Evan happy birthday," I said. Claire finally reached for the cake then, holding it like something she would deal with later, an inconvenient package she wished I had kept to myself. She didn't thank me. She didn't apologize. She simply closed the door, and the click of the latch felt louder than the laughter behind it. I walked toward the elevator feeling like every step was carrying me further from the boy I once knew. The ride down was silent except for the low hum of the cables. My reflection stared back at me from the metal doors, tired eyes, gray hair pulled into a loose bun, a sweater I had chosen carefully that morning because I wanted to look nice for my son. Somehow, in the elevator's dim light, I looked like someone fading around the edges. Outside, the cold hit me like a blunt truth. Cars rushed past. People hurried along the sidewalks with bags of groceries, warm coats, laughter, lives they were eager to get back to. I stood there for a long moment, holding on to my car keys, trying to steady the weight in my chest. For years, I told myself I was imagining the distance, that I was sensitive, that Evan was busy, that families change and mothers must learn to step aside. But as I sat in my car, the music from their party echoing faintly down the street, I finally saw the truth with painful clarity. I hadn't been stepping aside. I had been pushed. And the worst part was that I had allowed it, hoping, always hoping, that love would be enough to bring him back to me. But love, I realized that night, cannot survive on hope alone. Not when the door closes on you. When I got home that night, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table with the cake crumbs still smudged on my sleeve, trying to understand how a lifetime of love could shrink into a single moment of humiliation. My apartment felt colder than usual, as if the air itself was waiting for me to admit something I wasn't ready to face. I opened the drawer where I kept old documents, papers Evan once handed me with quick explanations and a trusting smile. Just a signature. Mom. It's for convenience. I had signed everything without reading because that's what mothers do for their children. We believe them. But as I spread the papers across the table under the soft glow of a lamp, the truth surfaced with a sting sharper than any insult Claire could throw at me. My name was on a mortgage I didn't own. My credit had been tied to loans I never agreed to. A joint account I thought was for emergencies had been drained month after month. Each page felt like a quiet betrayal, the kind that doesn't explode, it corrodes. I spent the night reading every line twice, sometimes 3 times, feeling an old version of myself fall away. By sunrise, I wasn't numb anymore. I was clear. I met with a lawyer the next day, a man with calm eyes who listened without judgment as I explained everything. When he told me I had the legal right to revoke my signatures, freeze the account, and force the mortgage into immediate repayment, something inside me steadied, not out of revenge, but out of survival. The notifications hit Evan and Claire within 48 hours. They called me repeatedly, their voices frantic, shifting from anger to pleading in minutes. Evan said I was ruining his life. Claire insisted it was all a misunderstanding. But I had spent too many years accepting misunderstandings that only ever hurt one person, me. So I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, I won't be used anymore, and ended the call. The day the foreclosure notice arrived for their condo, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. For the first time in years, I chose myself, not out of spite, but because I finally understood that love without respect isn't love at all. And as I stood by my window watching the city wake, I realized something simple and steady. Losing what was hurting me never meant losing myself. It meant finding her again.